This is episode 47 of the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast with Steve Groves from Good Life Fitness.
Quite frankly, as I started looking at what they were doing with iOS 11, the most obvious thing was some of the announcements that they made around GymKit. We want to make sure that the information that we're collecting on our watch and the information that's being collected on the various pieces of cardio equipment is being recorded accurately. And we've never really had an easy way to make sure that that was happening. And now with GymKit, it looks like we're finally going to be at a point where, the heart rate information that's being collected from my watch is now going to be shared with my treadmill, so I don't necessarily have to wear a chest strap if I choose not to. And similarly, all of the data from the treadmill itself, in terms of my speed and the distance that I've run and whatnot, is now going to be able to be fed back into the watch and ultimately into the Apple Health application on my phone.
Welcome to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast for club owners, operators, and fitness professionals. I am your host, Josh Trent, and this is your number one trusted resource for the accelerating world of fitness technology. Each week, we bring you an expert interview with a global influencer at the crossroads of fitness and technology. You'll gain the insights, tools, and inspiration you need to stay connected to the pulse of what matters most for your fitness business in the age of exponential technologies. With a recent update for Apple's iOS 11, today on the podcast, we're learning about what this means to the fitness industry from the Chief Information Officer and Vice President of Good Life Fitness, Steve Groves. Now, if you're like most of us in the fitness space, you've been hearing rumors for months about how Apple has been gearing up to change the landscape of how we do business, take payments, collect activity data, and engage our members using GymKit and opening up this bidirectional NFC reading capability, along with so much more. On episode 47, we're exploring this pivotal subject in depth to uncover the real truth behind how club staff, front desk, trainers, and everyone that complements the member's journey will now shortly be able to serve at a higher level and save the member valuable time by using this bidirectional NFC capability for the creation of a truly seamless experience that so many in the industry have been asking for. This iOS update points the needle of progress in the right direction and opens up a future where using the iPhone to gain access to a club and all of its amenities with just a single fingerprint touch through a mobile device becomes a reality. Apple's NFC functions coming to the watch with watchOS 4 and iOS 11 might also be handling much more than just Apple Pay transactions and passbook check-ins. With over 2,700 fitness tech companies listed on AngelList and with the pivotal new updates for iOS 11, how do we get closer to clarity in a fast expanding space? The answer to that question and many more takeaways for club owners, operators, and fitness pros in this episode with Steve Groves. Steve Groves is the CIO and VP at Good Life Fitness with over 20 years of success in bridging the logistical and communication gaps between business leaders and their technical teams in order to achieve results. Steve is an industry pro who specializes in collaborating with senior management and company boards to drive the strategic use of tech, both to support employees and to delight customers. He's an expert in uncovering, quote, the art of the possible in terms of using digital tech to personalize the customer experience. He's a creative thinker with an eye towards tech trends on the horizon and has extensive experience in ICT service management, internet strategy, digital media strategy, mobile app design, productivity consulting, and management of high-performance teams. I'd like to welcome Steve Groves to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast.
Thanks, Josh. It's a real pleasure. I've been a subscriber from the early days of the podcast. And quite frankly, it's a little bit surreal hearing your voice describing me rather than one of the other guests that I'm normally listening to the bio of. So thank you very much for having me on.
Well, we appreciate you listening. There's so many influencers in our space that are creating a ripple effect of change. You're one of them. We're excited to showcase not only your expertise, but just your vantage point right now on the effect of Apple, iOS 11, what this is doing for our fitness industry. Now, we're going to go into a discussion about these Apple updates and bidirectional NFC, what's really missing in fitness and what you're driving with Good Life. But I'd love for you to share with us just, a 30, 45-second story about how you rose to be CIO at Good Life.
Short version of the story is, I really relatively early in my career lucked out and I've been blessed to have latched on and grabbed the tail of this comet that is Good Life Fitness and have been able to ride the tail of, the success of the organization. And we've got an amazing visionary leader here, David Patchell-Evans. So when I joined, we started off, I think we had about 60 clubs when I first joined the company back in 2003 and started the IT department. Back at that point, we didn't have an IT department to speak of. And, now here we are. And We've got across the various different brands, we're just under 400 clubs, and it's rocking right along. It's been a lot of fun.
It's interesting. You had an internet company in 2002. You've been in tech for quite some time. Can you tell us about your past experience in the internet field, in the technology field, selling that company in 2002?
Yeah. So, I graduated back in 1993, 94. And for any of the listeners who kind of know their history, I was coming into an economy that was not doing very well. So it was either a case of find a very low-level job, probably doing something that I hadn't trained for during my university days, or start my own business. So that's exactly what I did. Is I started a company. Fortunate, it's one of those things where luck can really help you out in your career. Yeah. And I was very fortunate that my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, worked at the big university here in town. And, as you may recall, the internet, ARPANET, with the World Wide Web, it really started off in the military and university post-secondary education space. So she was showing me what was happening with the internet even before the World Wide Web had come out. And I distinctly remember we were at a football game one day on campus, and our local football team was up by a sizable margin at halftime. So she said, "Why don't you come check out what's happening with the internet?" And as she described it, she said they've added pictures to the internet, which was her way of describing, the launch of the World Wide Web and the introduction of Mosaic and Netscape. That led me to really trying to discover what this could possibly mean from a commercial standpoint. And I started my first business right after that and ran it until 2002 when I subsequently sold it, as you mentioned. And about 6 months later, joined Good Life.
Well, this is such a bright road. And speaking of brightness, our future, when we look at tech, when we see how this is going to impact the member experience, that's bright as well. We talked in a previous call, we were talking about iOS 11 just this month, major updates, major impact for the fitness space. This points to a brighter future where essentially we can put more club experiences into a member's phone. Can you share with us the impact that you received and just paint a quick picture of the high points of the Apple updates for iOS 11 and how this might impact the fitness industry in a positive way?
Quite frankly, as I started looking at what they were doing with iOS 11, the most obvious thing was some of the announcements that they made around GymKit. And, we're eagerly waiting to get our hands on some of the equipment, the cardio equipment that we know our friends at the various equipment manufacturers are going to be sending out to us. I think for us, that's probably going to be the most exciting part, giving our members the opportunity to better understand, what is happening. We all want to close, for those of us who use Apple devices, we want to close the activity rings on our watch. And we want to make sure that the information that we're collecting on our watch and the information that's being collected on the various pieces of cardio equipment is being recorded accurately. And we've never really had an easy way to make sure that was happening. And now with GymKit, it looks like we're finally going to be at a point where the heart rate information that's being collected from my watch is now going to be shared with my treadmill. So I don't necessarily have to wear a chest strap if I choose not to. And similarly, all of the data from the treadmill itself, in terms of my speed and the distance that I've run and whatnot, is now going to be able to be fed back into the watch and ultimately into the Apple Health application on my phone. So, I think at the surface level, that's probably the most impactful thing that we're going to see from iOS 11 as a club owners and operators.
And with watchOS 4, this is bringing more intelligence, specifically artificial intelligence, this ability for virtual coaching features to the Apple Watch. So they call it smart activity coaching. I'd love for you to maybe share with us the things you know about what Apple is in development of. You probably travel the world and you're speaking with people that are in touch with Apple. They have actually what I've heard is secret departments, Steve, where they're developing some of the most groundbreaking technology that will enter the fitness space at some point. Can you share with us what you know about Apple's programs and how those programs in artificial intelligence and machine learning might affect our fitness space?
I would obviously be lying if I told you I had any kind of insider information about what they're doing. But, we're somewhat blessed in that one of the gentlemen who was to a large degree an icon within our industry for a number of years is now leading up. And I don't want to overstate his role there, but my impression is that he's overseeing all of the fitness and health aspects, particularly around the watch within Apple, and that's Jay Balanek. Jay has been very gracious to meet with a number of us around the world who he used to work with back in his days when he was directly involved in the fitness industry. And he's leveraging those relationships to get out there and help us understand, where Apple's going and what they're trying to do with the various products that they're introducing. I've heard probably many of the same stories that you have, whereby they're investing a significant amount of time and money in, these labs, these fitness innovation labs, to try to figure out, what are the kinds of capabilities that we want to add into the watch and other wearable devices, because there's lots of rumors that there will be additional devices coming out in the next couple of years. Looking at what are the things that they're going to be able to add into those devices to the benefit of the fitness industry and the overall health and wellness of people around the world.
I think what's powerful too, we posted this on the FitC Facebook page. We'll link that in our show notes. Steve, we know now that Apple and Fitbit, specifically Fitbit's relationship to Dexcom, which is continuous glucose blood monitoring, we're going to see this come together, but yet I don't think it'll ever be in the watch, because I think that would be too hard to have a watch that would actually pierce the skin. Do you know anything about collecting different biometrics in combination with an Apple Watch or a Fitbit? Do you see that in the next 2 years affecting the fitness industry?
I think for many of us, the holy grail in terms of quantified self, or, the Internet of Things when it comes to tracking our health and wellness, is what we ingest. And it's relatively straightforward for people to calculate, the caloric burn that we're putting ourselves through as we go through various different forms of exercise. And even, as we're passively going about our day-to-day, mundane life and sedentary life. But the part that we've all, or many of us, have been kind of lobbying for a while is just this idea that we will be able to, through a wearable of some sort, understand what kind of calories we're ingesting. Because, for any of us who have spent any time in that quantified self space, the hardest part of it is recording your food intake and even trying to get it remotely accurate, so that you can understand, whether or not you're putting yourself in a good position. I know that myself personally, I record everything in my Fitness Pal, and I track all my calories on both Runkeeper and the Apple Watch. And then come 8 or 9 at night, I take a look down and see whether or not I've left myself 200 or 300 calories to have a drink at the end of the night, or whether or not I've already gone over my calories for the day. And maybe the better thing to do would be to go out for a walk, rather than have a beer with a friend. So, it's interesting when we look at the impact of information. I think we live in a time right now, I know all of us can relate, where there's an inundation of over information, and we're all feeling this. And so when I look at podcasting, the conversation you and I are having is at that bleeding edge. It's for people who really want to understand what are the things around tech and fitness that I get to pay attention to, because at the end of the day, the things we're going to explore more of in the show today, this really affects not only the bottom line for the operators and owners, but also just enjoying the day to day with all the tech changes. We get to be open-minded when it comes to this. We had an episode with Brian Hayden from Shapelog. You actually heard this on the FTP show. Can you tell us quickly what happened there? You went up and actually checked out the product for Shapelog to see if that was a fit. I'm always keeping my feelers out there to understand what's going on both within our industry and also within some of the adjacent industries, such as hospitality or retail, where we can also learn a lot. And I distinctly recall sitting in my kitchen having my breakfast, listening to your podcast. And I heard about the company, and I thought, well, that sounds intriguing. So I reached out to them, I think on Twitter, and this is probably Saturday morning at 8 a.m. I got a response back on Twitter within 45 minutes, maybe even as little as half an hour. And we very quickly set up a meeting. The team came in they're about 3-hour drive west of us. So they came in and gave us a great demonstration of their product. And, it was one of those products that I probably would have eventually heard about, but as I may have mentioned to you before, there are right now 2,700 fitness technology companies listed up on Angel List. And that probably is just a fraction of the ones that are out there that we haven't yet heard about. So really trying to go through and figure out which of those companies are creating compelling products that could either disrupt our industry and we need to be worried about, or are very complementary to what it is that we're already doing today. And we need to look at bringing them in and offering them up to our members. I mean, that's an important part of the role of somebody such as myself.
And I so enjoyed that episode with Brian. It's number 19. We'll link that conversation in the show notes today with Steve Groves. Steve, we can't look past 3 to 5 years in tech. You mentioned this to me, and it really made me shake my head with truth, because our industry, it moves so quickly in regards to technology affecting it. Should we be looking 6 months ahead? How far ahead into the future should we be looking to have a realistic grasp of how tech might affect us?
I think it really depends on the role that you're in. I mean, in my role, I'm usually looking 1, 3, 5, and 10 years out. And not unlike the weather. The weather forecast for tomorrow is incredibly relevant for me because I already know what is on my agenda for tomorrow. So I can create some context around what the weather is going to be and what that means for what I'm trying to do. And similarly, when it comes to technology, I mean, for somebody who's responsible for day-to-day operation of a chain of half a dozen clubs or 50 clubs or even, hundreds of clubs, we do need to understand what's coming a year from now, so that we can make the appropriate decisions from a budgeting standpoint. 3 years out, a little bit more difficult because, the landscape's changing so rapidly. And so similar to the weather, I might care what the weather is going to be like 3 months from now so I can, start shopping for clothing that would be appropriate for it. But in the whole scheme of things, I have no idea what I'm going to be doing 3 months from now. So the weather isn't all that meaningful. And it's the same for me when it comes to technology. So as much as I love to get into conversations about what technology is going to be like for the fitness industry 10 years from now, it's just virtually impossible to really get your head around how much technology is going to change the world in a 10-year horizon. It's quite mind-boggling when you really get into it and you think about how much artificial intelligence and robotics and image technologies are going to transform all industries, including ours, over the next over that kind of decade horizon.
Thank you for reminding us about not looking too far in the future. It's almost as if I heard Jack Canfield speak once and he said, you really don't want to look beyond how far your headlights shine. So look as far as the headlights are shining, but don't look too far because you really don't know what's going to happen around the bend. So thank you for reminding us about that. When I look at disruption, there's also incredible opportunities from the personal training front, the member service front. Can you unpack for us what you see happening just in that headlights view, that 6-month or 12-month view of how you're seeing disruption and opportunities in the personal training segment of our space?
If I could take everything that I've learned in the last 5 years and apply it to one role in our company, which one would it be? Hands down, it would be personal training, because the tools and technologies that are available to that group of people is really quite mind-boggling. I mean, even drilling down into something as simple as rest. We know that a good personal trainer recognizes that their client's week is comprised of 168 hours. It's not just the 3 hours that client comes in and spends time with them. And quite frankly, those 3 hours probably aren't as impactful in terms of the person's overall health compared to the other 165 hours in the week. So if I'm a personal trainer and I'm wanting to make sure that my client has really absorbed the workout that I put them through, I need to understand what happened to their sleep patterns for the 2 days following the workout. I need to understand their nutrition. And so gathering all that information through some of the amazing devices we're starting to see. I mean, little segue, I recently, within the last, 6 months, purchased a device called the ResMed S Plus, which is a wireless sleep monitoring device that sits on my bedside table. Just looks like a little box, almost like an alarm clock with no display. It is able to, through my covers, monitor all of the subtle movements that I go throughout the night. And it's the first device that I've ever used that is able to pick up and distinguish between light sleep, deep sleep, and REM sleep. And so for me, it's been fascinating to go back through and look at how my nutritional habits and my exercise habits and, quite frankly, my stress level during the day is reflected in that data. Now, coming back to your question, I'm not currently working with a personal trainer who can look at that with me and help me understand, what is this data telling me? What do I need to do differently? Fortunately, the app that ResMed has developed is starting to do some of that. It's providing me with some degree of coaching based on what it's seeing from my restfulness or my lack of adequate sleep, and that is providing some advice and guidance and feedback. So if I'm a personal trainer, that's the kind of thing that I want to have access to as I'm working with my client. Yeah. If I'm a personal trainer, that's also the kind of thing that I may be getting a little bit nervous about if I'm looking 5 years out and wondering where that kind of technology is going to take us. There's many different other examples within the PT space, but that's easily the area that I think has got the most potential.
I'm flashing back to the conversation with Lee Embley, where we talked about fitness tech and wellness, really fitness, such an integral piece of wellness. You're talking about sleep, which is part of that fitness component, but really it's a really solid piece of a wellness wheel. And so when we look at the quantified self and the ways that we can fill this in, I can't think of a better way to include financial health into this than with this bidirectional NFC, the ability for clients and fitness members to pay for their services Really, the question is, how do we save our members time? How do we make this UX and UI totally seamless that everyone is talking about in our space, Steve? Can you fill us in on this? I mean, how does this bidirectional NFC plug in? What does it mean to saving the customer and the member time and just making that truly seamless experience?
I mean, one of the big buzzwords that we're hearing a lot about, and it certainly came up in a conference I attended earlier this week, was, this whole notion of frictionless. And, what many of us in the technology space are trying to do is eliminate friction from various different transactions that happen within our clubs. And obviously, if you're in a different industry, in other spaces. So for me, it's all about, how do I remove all friction from the joining process? How do I eliminate all friction from the access control, the entry into our clubs? So, we start to look at what Android and Google and Samsung and some of the others have done with their space. They're now able to do bidirectional NFC, whereas Apple has still kept that very closed. So, any of the listeners who are familiar with Apple Pay will know that with my watch or with my phone, I can go in and I can send information from my phone into a terminal and make a payment, which is a fantastic experience for any consumer, whether they're a fitness club member or just a general retail consumer. And I don't know the numbers, but my understanding of it from Apple's talks is that, they're finding some massive adoption with that technology, and they expect that it'll be ubiquitous in a number of years. But unfortunately, for people such as myself, Apple's keeping that closed. So, what we would love to be able to do is take that same capability and integrate it into the phones for our members so that they can gain access into our clubs with, nothing more than their thumb on the fingerprint reader on their phone and just tapping their phone at a front entryway, or even gaining access to some of the amenities that we have in our clubs using that same capability. So I think we're all eagerly and in some cases impatiently waiting for the day when that will be made available to us.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, we're trying to find other ways that we can create a frictionless experience for our members as best as we can. But that really will be a very important day, I think, in a lot of respects, when that's available both on the watch and on the phone itself.
We're linking a post from Engadget here. iOS 11 could use the iPhone's NFC chip for more than Apple Pay. This new framework gives iOS apps access to the short-range protocol. If someone has not heard of NFC, if they didn't listen to one of our earlier episodes where we talked about this near-field tech, can you explain in layman's terms what NFC is?
Very simply, it's just a wireless communication protocol, the overused term, but that's exactly what it is. And so what it allows you to do is wirelessly send a bit of information from one device to another device. The term you often hear used almost interchangeably, though they're technically a little different, is radio frequency identification, or RFID. And so the notion is, in the past, I've always had to carry an RFID chip on my person somewhere, whether that's on a keychain, or I know a lot of fitness companies will put an RFID chip into a wristband. What Apple and Samsung and others have done is they've essentially mimicked that same capability, but put it right in the phone itself. So there's not an RFID chip per se, but the phone itself and the watch have the ability to mimic that and essentially broadcast a very short range wireless signal that is securely sent across through the air an inch or two, and then that's picked up on by a receiver that takes in that information and then processes it accordingly, whether that's to process a credit card transaction, or, as I say, the GymKit, the Apple GymKit integration uses NFC. So you walk up, you tap your phone on the console of the cardio equipment, and it creates a pairing. It synchronizes from that quick little tap of the wrist. Mm-hmm. That's using NFC as well.
Now, this NFC versus ACR, you talked previously, and you've mentioned this many times, access control readers. This bidirectional NFC is going to open up with Apple possibly in iOS 11. You could probably speak to that more intelligently than I could. But what are the concerns around safety, though, when we look at how the NFC is going to access this control reader? And then, tech like Bluetooth beacons. NFC could also invite potential privacy issues onto iOS. Is that why there's been slow adoption?
We're all speculating as to why, because as I say, everybody in the world who's got a smartphone, for the most part, you're in one of two camps. You're either in the Google Android camp or you're in the Apple camp. And the Google Android folks love to rub in the fact that the bidirectional NFC capability, the ability to both project out a signal from the phone as well as read a signal with the phone, has been in Android devices for, I think the better part of 2 or 3 years. So it's nothing new for them. So the question is often asked, well, why is Apple so protective of this? And I'm sure there's strategic reasons that, I could never possibly imagine myself. But it's been speculated that, there's security and safety. They really want to, as Apple often tries to do, they want to perfect the usage of a new technology for their own use before they open it up to third-party developers. Not unlike, a little sidebar, but not unlike the fact that I can plug my phone into my car using the Apple CarPlay capability, but Apple Maps is the only mapping tool that can be displayed on the dashboard of my car, despite the fact that I might have Google Maps or Waze or any of a number of other navigation tools on there. Apple's keeping that very close so that they can get a jump ahead of everybody, I would presume.
These gaps that we see in fitness technology adoption, one of the core tenets of the Fitness Industry Tech Council is to increase technology adoption in the fitness industry. From your vantage point in traveling the globe, what are you seeing right now that are the gaps in slowing the adoption of tech in the fitness space, both for trainers and club operators and owners alike?
As I mentioned, I've been in the industry now for quite a while, and I used to be able to go to the IRSA conference. And as massive as the trade show floor is, I think the first 2 years I went to the conference, I was through the trade show floor and off wandering down to find the closest beach within about 45 minutes. It was a little alarming, quite frankly, because this wasn't that long ago. So this was 2004, I think was the first year I went to IRSA. But now it's quite the opposite. I hit the trade show floor not long after it opens up, and oftentimes I'm begging somebody to keep some of the booths open after hours because I haven't had a chance to talk to everybody. So it is changing. I think the vendors that have been in our industry for a long time have grown to widely adopt technology, and they recognize that it's important for them. And then we've got a lot of new companies that are coming in that 8-10 years ago didn't even exist. Why the club operators themselves are still slow to adopt them, I think there's not as much of a spirit of experimentation. I think many of us would like to think that we are very innovative, and certainly from a programming standpoint, fitness programming, we, as an industry, I think we're fantastic from that standpoint. But I don't feel as though that we are very experimental, because experimentation comes with failure. For whatever reason, I don't think we really have a culture that tolerates failure all that well within the industry yet. So I'm hoping that will change. I'm hoping we'll start to see companies that are willing to experiment with different technologies, knowing full well that maybe only 20% of them will work. One, in a lot of cases, technology won't work. And two, will be accepted and adopted and embraced by our members. And until you get it into the hands of 1,000 or more members, oftentimes it's really difficult to know whether or not something's going to take off.
I love that you mentioned experimentation, because that is such a pivotal piece in innovation. If we're not experimenting, if we're not seeing what can fill new expectations and what can deliver higher than the bar that's been previously set, how are we supposed to improve? How are we supposed to grow? I'm curious how you're driving experimentation and innovation with the technology at Good Life.
We're still trying to operationalize that as best we can. It's an area that I truly believe that because we have a founder, CEO, leader who, quite frankly, doesn't have to answer to anybody else. There's no venture capital team behind us that is standing over his shoulder. He is very much one of those entrepreneurs who will embrace experimentation. But, we've really taken our time in terms of looking at the technology is something that will drive behavioral change for our members. It's really just been in the last 2 or 3 years where we've got to that state. I for a long time have kind of followed what people often refer to as the dandelion philosophy, or the dandelion principle. And the notion is that, if a dandelion has 200 seeds on it, it's got 200 seeds that are all going to blow off into the wind, and 99% of them are going to land on concrete or sidewalk, and maybe 1 or 2% will land in fertile ground and sprout. And if you kind of go into it with that mindset that, I'm going to try 100 things, and if 2 or 3 of them work, then I've been successful. And then obviously the important part of that metaphor is that the other 97, 98% that fail, you need to fail fast. You need to recognize when something's not going to work and be willing to kill it within 30 or 60 days at the most. So we've been experimenting with a number of different tools and technologies, many of which are probably people that you've had on the podcast before, and really trying to figure out which of those connects with the Canadian public, and the ones that they embrace and will ultimately drive the behavioral change that we're trying to help them with.
That is the first time we've heard of the dandelion principle on the podcast. So thank you so much for mentioning that. We will definitely link that in the show notes. If you're listening right now, you can just tap your artwork on your phone and that link will be right there for you to click on. Steve, this is the last part of the show. I'm really excited to ask you 6 questions in our Fit 6 round. Are you ready?
You know what? Every one of your guests says that they're ready, and I don't know that I am, but we're going for it anyway. Let's go.
That is such honesty right there. I so appreciate that. Well, we look at growth. You talked about failing forward, failing fast. Can you share with us one of your biggest growth moments that you've experienced in the fitness industry?
Oh, I've failed so many times in this industry and been able to brush myself up and get back up again. Probably one of the biggest growths was, we tried to implement a club management system here that we were developing ourselves. And we tried to do it. It was probably about 8 years ago. And I made many, many mistakes. And ultimately, we ended up shelving the project. Probably the biggest thing that for me became an important part was the realization that there are no technology projects in a company like ours. They're all business projects. They're all projects that are meant to drive the business forward. And if they happen to have a technology slant to them, then that's great. Yeah. I think the organizations that have their quote unquote tech guy or girl doing all of the work and then, the rest of the company's waiting for it to be delivered, they're doomed to failure.
We talk about white space so much on and off the show, I'm sure in many circles, but when we understand the white space in tech, Tim Ferriss has a phrase where he asks, what if I did the opposite? I'm curious for you, looking at where our attention could be rather than where everyone else is looking. What do you think as far as white space right now exists at the intersection of fitness and tech?
I think for a lot of organizations, they need to think about the other, I used the expression earlier, the other 165 hours. We get so focused on the 2 or 3 hours a week that we see the member in our clubs, and we often forget that, or we don't necessarily pay attention to the fact that they are, an individual who lives 168 hours in any given week, not just the 2 or 3 that we spend with them. And although some of the tools and technologies that we could bring to bear on the problems of their life may not actually assist them for the time that they're in the club, nonetheless, they're looking to us as fitness and wellness experts. And we need to explore those tools as much as we do the tools that we know we're going to put within the 4 walls of our club.
So powerful. Thank you for reminding us to look outside of our space for what can be of service inside of our space. The future of tech. I know that you mentioned to me that Good Life wants to build all these incredible tools. How far are we away from having a member scan their thumb on their phone to enter a club?
I think Tim Cook and the folks at Apple might be the only ones who could answer that directly, at least all members. As I said earlier, we believe that that's a capability that we could introduce for our members imminently if we wanted to, but we would be reducing that just to a subset of our members, given we know that a good 60+% of our members are using Apple devices and not an Android device. So to answer the question, if I'm looking in a crystal ball, most of the technologies that we would need in order to do that are available to us today. There's various different ways that we could hack around it. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody's doing that within the next 12 months. And I certainly would like to be the one that's able to say that we've done that ourselves. So,
what do you love most about working in the fitness industry?
The people, far and away. I spent a number of years consulting with various different organizations in various different industries in a number of different countries. And the people in this industry are the most energetic, fun, intelligent group that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. As much as over the last decade, we've lamented the fact that technology is not pervasive in our industry and is not as widely utilized as it really ought to be, the people are what keep you interested in. And I think we finally reached that inflection point in the last 18 to 24 months. And it's becoming a very exciting time in the industry right now.
Looking at innovation and growth, the way we can move forward as technology exponentially grows. One of your favorite quotes you mentioned to me was from Henry Ford. And he mentioned if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Can you explain why that's one of your favorites?
just this notion that if we go back out to the market and ask them what they're looking for in terms of technology, or even if we ask some of the senior leaders of the organizations that we work within, that adage that, they're going to tell you that they want something a little better than what they have right now. And I think what we need to do is, look a little further out. As much as I said earlier, you don't want to look too far out onto the horizon. I think it is very important to really understand what is coming down the pipe in the next 5 years from a technology standpoint, and help people understand what that can mean for us in terms of our industry, and help between the group of us, help us kind of articulate the design for the car rather than just designing a better horse.
Great metaphor. And this is the last question. We look at the intersection of tech and fitness. What are you looking down the pipe for? What are you most excited about? What's possible for the club owner's bottom line, but also for serving the human health needs that we see on the planet?
Well, from a club ownership standpoint, I'm really looking for organizations that can help us remove all that friction from the joining process when we're talking about online joining and whatnot. And as well, in terms of servicing our members and providing tools to our employees so that they can better serve our members. From a consumer standpoint in the fitness technology space, I am very intrigued by organizations that seem to potentially be on the cusp of releasing technologies that'll help us understand the calories that people are ingesting. And, we're talking to a couple of different companies right now that are doing just that, and they're, through their initial trials, are showing some promising results. Certainly nothing that a personal trainer would look at and say it's accurate enough for me to work with today. But, if we can get to the point where it's virtually frictionless for a member, or for anybody for that matter, to understand what they've just ingested over the previous 3 or 4 hours, then that's going to be an interesting space that I think will be within the 2 or 3 year horizon.
Steve, thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and just so much expertise with us on the show. I knew it was going to be a great conversation, but I was really pleased at the different nuances that we explored. Everyone can learn more about Good Life at goodlifefitness.com. If you have a question for Steve, you can just do that by tapping on your show artwork, type out your question, leave us an iTunes review, and we will make sure that Steve gets that question, that we'll mention your name on the air. Steve Groves, thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Josh. Thanks very much for having me.
Club owners and operators are at the beginning of an exponential increase in data communication with cardio equipment, the Apple Watch, and Apple's Health app, as the connectivity of wearables and other fitness and wellness tech opens up new APIs and data silos beyond the 4 walls of the club. When it comes to game-changing advancements in the fitness tech space, it's important to keep a close watch on what Apple is up to in the next 6 months. The new iOS 11 updates are driving more precise accuracy standards to be established for wearables, including heart rate information, treadmill speeds, and other activity data sets that will be fed into Apple's Health Kit and used by tech-savvy fitness organizations. Steve believes it's important for all of us in the industry to remain curious regarding the future of tech so we can make the appropriate decisions from a budgeting and directional standpoint. However, Steve reminds us that trying to look too far out over the horizon is irrelevant, as the advancements in AI, robotics, and image technologies make it virtually impossible to predict how tech will transform the world in 10 plus years. One thing is for sure, if there's change happening at the intersection of fitness and technology, by listening to the show, you'll be connected to the pulse of what matters most for your fitness business. Thank you for listening to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast. Here's a quick message from Brian O'Rourke.
Hello, everyone. This is Brian O'Rourke. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast. I also want to extend our thanks to Josh and the many, many wonderful professionals who've contributed their time and expertise for free for the health club and fitness industry at large. Wouldn't you like your fitness brand, product, or service to be featured on a podcast like this? I know I would. And that's why the Fitness Industry Technology Council, myself, and our companies like Moon Mission Media, Baderi Ventures, and Vertimax, among others, have been underwriting the podcast for the last 9 months. Check the show notes for details and consider becoming a sponsor. It's a great way to reach thousands of industry professionals in the fitness and health club space and be a part of educating people on technology adoption and all the opportunities it's going to provide. So please consider joining us here at the podcast, and we look forward to the many series of podcasts ahead. Thanks so much.